Like school, e-learning.
Hello and welcome back to the how-to guide for TOEFL. And right now we're going to be working on question type 4. Question type 4. And question type 4 is also in integrated speaking, which means you need to listen, read, and speak. But it's a bit different because it's called an academic task. Whereas 3 took place outside of the classroom, question 4 takes place inside the classroom. With just like question 3, you have 45 seconds to read something, 30 seconds to prepare, and 60 seconds to speak. So it's similar to question 3 in that sense. The 45 seconds to read, I like to think of it as a piece of homework. It's about a paragraph, and it is something you would generally read before class, or sort of an introduction to the class, or something your professor will hand out at the beginning of class. So it's just a short passage. And usually, you're looking for a definition. It'll define something. It'll say, this is what, a happening is, or it'll tell you about one moment in history, or the piano and how it's formatted, like the structure of it, or something along those lines. It'll give you sort of a really clear definition or phrase you can use. And then there's a lecture. Now this lecture can be anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5 minutes long, depending on the test. Sometimes it's a bit easier and sometimes it's more difficult. So it's helpful to learn a little bit about what to expect with the lecture, how the lecture will be given, how the format will be. And there's about 3 things, maybe 4, that the lecture generally does. First, it could expand on the idea. So it'll say, the piano continued to develop after it was invented in the 1700s. That's from this reading. And then it'll have more details about that, saying how the Industrial Revolution made it possible to make steel frames for the piano so you can make louder sounds. It expands on the idea. They're talking about the same thing, except the lecture is giving more information. Or the lecture could give examples. So the reading could talk about what a happening is. It's a moment in time where an artist and an observer are making art together, and that experience is the full art form. So that's the definition of happening, but they're examples. The first art happening took place at Mountain College, and this moment in history, and then it continued on, and now people do happening art all the time. That's sort of an example. Or it could compare and contrast it. So question number 1 will be about, the reading passage will be about, the benefits of making cars in the United States, like how it offers a lot of jobs and people, and security, and people have always liked cars, and Americans love their cars. Whereas the lecture will talk about the dangers of the car making industry, about how it's not sustainable, and an example of when a Japanese car company started selling more cars, and then this American car company, and everybody lost their jobs. So they're talking about the same idea, but looking at it 2 different ways. So these are some of the ways the lecture and the reading relate to each other. Now the hardest part for some is figuring out what sentence should go right here. Because it's easy to say in the reading passage it says that blah 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 blah. You have to have a transition. The TOEFL test givers actually listen for your transitions. It's one of the things they judge. So when you are getting yourself from the reading to the lecture, it's important to know the relationship. And these are some examples of what the relationship could be. So you could say the lecture expands on the idea and gives more details, and then talk about that. Or the lecture gives several examples, or the lecture contrasts that idea with a different point. So this is helpful for your transition. Once the lecture is finished, you'll have about 30 seconds to prepare. That's a really good time to figure out this relationship. And then after you prepare, you have 60 seconds to speak. This question is, for many of my students, the most difficult question because it is the most involved. The most information is being communicated, is being told to you, and you have to figure out what information is important and what information isn't important. The way to go about doing that is paying really close attention to the wording of the question, because sometimes the question will say, tell me about these 3 instruments in the orchestra, whereas the lecture will talk about 5 instruments in the orchestra, but you only have to talk about those 3. So it's really important to read the question very, very carefully before you start speaking. Good luck.